Welcome, everyone, to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on July 31st, 2024. Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Savas is on his way. All commissioners are present today. First policy session is review of the county's cost recovery policy. Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director, will present. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I bring before you a policy that was approved by a prior board in 2020. It's a cost recovery policy, and we developed this as part of an effort to reserve and control our general fund usage. And I wrote out a brief cost recovery, kind of 101 I wanted to share with you, which is the intent of this. We have a lot of services here at the county, and they charge fees, and there are fines associated with that to cover the staff costs, overhead, buildings. And when we charge these fees, sometimes they do not cover that total amount of cost due. And so that service needs to be subsidized. It can be subsidized by grants, which we go forward with a lot of grants. But those grants also are not fully covering a lot of fees. So then we have general funds subsidizes the grants and subsidizes the services. And our county, the fund that we always go to subsidize fees and charges and services is our general fund. It is a limited resource that we have, and as you know, that we're trying to use it for many services throughout the county. So a cost recovery policy that was developed here could support more reimbursement of the costs that we have. In this particular policy report that I have for you today, we are suggesting that instead of each year going through each fine and fee and developing a methodology of how much to increase it, that we would just propose a flat 3% increase each fiscal year. And then we would do it on the fiscal year so that it could be budgeted through the budget process as well. So this is for your consideration.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Are you finished?
I am.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Very nice. You mentioned general fund. Does this particular proposal cover funds that are not general fund, departments who do not have general fund? It covers all. Got it. Cindy's saying yes. Okay. So let's say we approve the 3%. I'm just doing an anecdotal here. And then the departments come back, oh, God, that 3% is not enough. My fees went up more than that. So it seems to me no matter what we give, there's always a pushback. And we need more, 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 more. And by the way, government does not need more. We need to start extracting less from our taxpayers and our people who are paying these fees. Now, I'm willing to go along with a percentage on here. I'm not saying I'm against it. But how do we get out of the do loop? Gary, let's say we pass a 2 or 3% across the board fee increase. Now, does that stay until the board changes their mind on it? So it's really not permanent, because it seems to me nothing we ever do here is permanent.
You're correct. It will be in place until a future board or this board changes it.
I'd like some discussion from commissioners. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, well, I have a concern about a flat increase across the board, because I think there's unique circumstances in which that maybe a department wouldn't even want that because it might price themselves out of perhaps a competitive type of nature or service. My first inclination is to think, well, maybe it's indexed to inflation with a cap of 3%, right? So let's just say things don't go up, and it's flexibility, or maybe it's optional for a department to say, hey, I have the ability to raise or choose to exercise an index and up to the cap, implement that where needed. So it's just a more departmental thing structurally, but across the board, knowing that fees is pages and pages of examples and so forth, I just don't think it makes sense to approach it that way. I mean, I appreciate the staff work and effort. I know I've heard my colleagues, including myself, at least I feel I've been relatively consistent with that nuance I just mentioned, that we talk about cost recovery all the time, but we don't implement the fees to make it cost recovery. So we've got to be consistent. And I would like us not to have to do all that work and go through all those fees and so forth. And so, but the question really is, let's just say it's a 3%, and it's capped at 3, or it's indexed with a cap. Is that going to solve the problem?
Can we get an answer on that?
Which is really kind of what Tootie said the first round.
Yeah,
It may
I
not
know.
be enough.
Yeah, would that be enough? Also, Commissioners, if we do this, it eliminates the very arduous task of us looking at every single little fee increase and nickel and dime to death, which is a lot of time. And do you know how many votes we have to take on fee increases? This is a one and we're done. And then, Gary, would we come back next year and revisit this again?
No, we just keep it in place until such time as you
So-
want to change it.
I kind of like that idea, as much as I hate fee increases and tax increases. Commissioner Shaw.
Yes, Finance Director Comfort. What is the magnitude of the problem, and how does 3% equate to in dollars?
Commissioner, that is an excellent question. We would need to do some research to identify what is the gap.
Well, can you give me an estimate? Can you give me an estimate on the magnitude of the issue? Are we talking about 100K? Are we talking about $1 million?
I would hesitate to.
Cindy Becker,
suggest.
would you please come up? Thank you.
Hi, Cindy Becker, County Administration. Commissioner, each one has a story. Each fee has a story. Some of the fees, for example, haven't been increased for years and years, and so a 3% isn't going to cover it for them, but it's progress. I think the question is, you can make it as big as there are grants out there, because there's just a lot of money involved, and they haven't been given increases. So I think it would be a lot of work to try to go grant by grant, but I can tell you that it's a lot, but it's not going to be enough.
Okay, Ms. Becker, that answer is as confusing as anything I've heard today.
Thank you.
Again, I don't have a feel for what the magnitude of the issue we're dealing with, and what a 3% increase on this would equate to on additional pressure on the general fund.
Most of these are going to be around non-general fund services, quite honestly. The grants that we get, again, are not general fund grants. And so those various services, primarily from public health, from DTD, from, I think the sheriff has a little bit, but most of that is not going to be from general fund programs.
Okay. So with that in mind, looks to me like your staff recommendation, number 1, is what I'll support today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas?
I guess I'm looking at staff with this question, and Gary in particularly. If we were, I mean, let's just say that, another example we really haven't talked about, let's just say that staff doesn't even, there's a particular fee that they don't want to raise, right? It doesn't make sense, can't, don't, want, right? How do you insert, if there's, again, whether it's a cap at 3 or whether it's indexed with a cap, how do you insert discretion into the policy?
Great question. So today, really, we're asking, are you open to the idea of a cap, 2 or 3%? And then we come back to you with those specific answers by department, because you're right, some fees will never need to be raised that much. Others, the consistent increase would help. But we can come back to you with that data if that's something you'd like us to pursue. If I may, Commissioners, the main question for you today that I would appreciate an answer is, do you support the idea of a cost recovery at all? Because if the answer is no, we'll rescind this policy and budget differently. But if you're open to maybe a modified version of a cost recovery, which basically means fees and fines. Let's be clear, raising fees and fines to recover the cost of doing the program for the public. I just
And-
want to know what your interest is.
And Paul, if I can interrupt before you finish, I'll let you finish. If we don't have a cost recovery plan, well, then what happens?
Then we'd have to carefully look at how we budget, and then you would determine what programs you'd like the general fund to cover, which programs you may want to reduce or eliminate, so that we can live within the means that we have.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, so the other thing I want to also mention is, was in business a long time. I realized that no matter what, there were things, operations, services we offered that I could never recover my cost, right? It was not feasible, it was impractical. So, that might be, I wouldn't want this to be something that there's a bandwagon jump on, that we're going to try to have a cost recovery model, a policy, which everything we do. So I want to have some kind of ability to make sure that we don't go overboard on that, because it's just not possible to recover everything that we do, period. So I would like to limit that at least to the existing fees and fines. Might be one way to doing that, right? Or fees, the fee schedule. And also, I'd like the staff from all the departments to say, what are the outliers where 3% isn't going to take care of there? It might need a one-time adjustment. But to your question, I would say, yes, I'm in favor of a recovery model with all those bookends or guideposts.
Cindy?
A couple of things, if I might. Part of the challenge or the problem is that our current policy says full cost recovery. You can still have a goal of cost recovery without requiring full cost recovery. And to your other points, Commissioner, we can put exemptions in the policy so that there are certain things that we won't do or won't cross. There are exemptions in the current policy. So again, as Administrator Schmidt said, we can work all of that depending upon the direction you want us to go in terms of having an across-the-board figure that we're aiming at, and then we could have certain exemptions with that and bring that back to you.
Is the word full, cost recovery versus full cost recovery, is that the wrong signal? Can we actually have a policy that just strike the word full?
Yes, Commissioner, it's your policy.
I mean, I'm just wondering if that does not undermine the effort.
We could, before I call on, are you done, Paul? Before we go to the other two commissioners, look, we discussed this in my office, and this is how I'm looking. There's a ledger, okay, commissioners? So every year, the highest cost of any of the services we present to the public is labor. We give an increase in labor. We give an increase to the benefits of our labor, of medical. Now, do the departments then, Gary, comes out of their pocket to pay that? In addition to, also, we have allocated costs. Are the allocated costs increase every year? And define for me what are allocated costs.
Elizabeth?
So allocated costs include the care of all the buildings, so our maintenance, our facility upkeep. It includes services for non-revenue generating departments like finance. We're an overhead, so we're cost allocated by the services for payroll, accounts payable, grants. So those are examples of cost allocations.
Is cost allocation the electric bill and the water bill?
Yes, utilities are also cost allocated.
The insurance to insure this building under loss.
Correct.
So every department has an allocated cost to all of the services, including our desks, our papers, our computers, and everything. So what is the big increase? I keep asking this question, and I can't get an answer. If the county is already covering the highest cost of the expense that we have as a county, but yet our departments keep coming back to us, oh, my fees increased, my costs increased to implement this program. Now, I do understand some of the departments who have a car on the road, that they have to go out and make inspections. So what comes to mind is the health department and DTT and building inspections and so forth. Cost of gasoline has increased. Possibly the cost of the auto insurance has increased. The cost of running a car has increased. Okay, that probably may not be covered in allocated costs. I don't know. So I keep asking this question that I can't give a solid answer to. Cindy and then Elizabeth.
So I hope to give you a solid answer. when we go through the budget and we go across the board increases in personnel and we have a certain amount of increase in materials and services, you're seeing the impact on the general fund, but the departments, the majority of their dollars come from other funds, they have to have the revenue to support that increase, because you're not giving them general funds to support that increase, you're expecting them to use their other revenue sources to support that increase. And so that's where the rub is, because they're required to increase their salaries and M&S, but they don't have extra general fund coming in to cover that if their revenue is coming from
So
grants.
the majority of the cost recovery is for programs that are not general fund.
The cost recovery is spread across everybody. So if the general fund programs, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because they're given extra general fund.
Yeah.
But for departments like DTD and H3S, where the majority of their funding comes from outside the county general fund, that's the issue, because that revenue may not be increasing, except for fees and fines.
Well, if that revenue is not increasing, then why are we doing it? That's just rhetorical. Elizabeth, you had a comment?
Well, I was just going to share that there's two types of increases the departments are seeing. One is the cost to provide the service, and then the other is through the cost allocations, through the budgeting process that we've been implementing for the last 2 years and in this current budget year. So the general fund, which we're looking at, how is the general fund dollars being used? We have been subsidizing the department's cost for central services. So instead of charging out finance 100% to all the departments that we serve, we've only been charging out 42%, and the general fund has been picking up the rest. What we're trying to do is shift that, and that's
Yeah.
and that's where, so if you're hearing from departments, their costs are increasing, that's because we're also trying to recognize what is the true cost to run DTD? What is the true cost to run our sheriff's office? And those are costs that are in addition to, that are being spread to the departments, in addition to their costs to provide services. So there's two components that are hitting each of the departments.
Thank you for that. We have commissioners. Commissioner Scholl.
Okay, so the staff recommendation, option 2, for the 3% increase, that's a broad brush stroke, reducing overall administrative effort to address cost recovery. But option 1, that is, leave the policy as written, would require that each cost recovery issue would then come at some time during the year to the board for consideration. And like Administrator Schmidt mentioned, that I think what he meant was that would give the board an opportunity to scrutinize each cost recovery issue and make a decision on maybe we need to cut it, maybe we need to reduce it, eliminate it, and it gives the board a greater opportunity to keep track of cost recovery issues throughout the year, whereas your staff recommendation for option 2 would simply, again, do a broad stroke solution to the problem, but then not give the board opportunity throughout the course of the year to really scrutinize these issues. Does that make any sense, Liz Comfort? She's looking at me like...
You are correct, Commissioner Schull.
Yeah.
The question is, do you want to be involved on a case-by-case basis, status quo as we've done it? Certainly you can. This suggestion of the flat increases really to save you the time, and that it's a consistently based. And we'll revise the language if you want to go that path, as you've suggested, to have better sideboards about it.
Okay. Have you finished, Mark?
Oh, well, the sideboard issue language might be helpful to me. Okay.
If you'd like to go that way, we would draft something and bring it back to you.
And bring it back for further
Yeah,
discussion.
Yeah, that might be a compromise here this morning.
I mean, I can go where you're at.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that. We have two more
Okay, thank
commissioners.
you.
Commissioner Schrader?
Well, I've always been a believer in cost recovery, because the bottom line is there are services that we offer that we do have to get some remuneration for, exactly because of how Cindy described it, is that, the departments that are really dependent on external dollars from the Fed and the state, we can get, we get what we get from them, but then we have to make up that, we have to make up that piece of it.
Partially funded mandate.
Yeah, well, which isn't our fault. And you could say, why are we doing it? But I guess I would assert that we do it because, we are the social system service provider in this county. There's no city that has the capacity to do a lot of what we're doing. And the bottom line is, we've always been very prudent in how we have raised our fees and how we have looked at each fee. I'm kind of curious, what is the real reason behind changing the policy, Gary, that we've been using all these years where we do get to go through each fee? And how did we base it on just a blanket 3%
Can you
increase?
explain that again, Gary?
Yeah, could you do that again? I mean, you already did, but I mean, I didn't mind going through the fees, but it is painful.
So my observation as your administrator for 5 years,
Yeah.
the four different boards I've worked with in 5 years, so not just this board,
Right.
always struggles with fees and fines.
Yep.
Every board. And it is painful and difficult. We can keep doing that path, but it's just difficult. And this is an suggestion that might make it a little less difficult for the board as you're considering these
Cindy?
increases.
So, Commissioner, also in answer to your question, we have a conflict. We have a policy that says full cost recovery, and then we don't approve the fees to do full cost
Full cost
recovery.
recovery.
So it doesn't matter which one you do, but consistency would be great. So either you go for full cost recovery and you do the fees, or you don't. And then we're trying to align it as well, because we got two different messages going out to staff and to the public. And so we're trying to not only make it a more efficient process, but we're also would like to make it a consistent expectation.
Okay. So it's not, sometimes I've always viewed it as aspirational too, aspirational cost recovery, but we haven't always done that. You're right.
I would say probably never.
No, it's always, I've been here for over 23 years now, and it's always been a major hurdle that we have to go through. And then just explain to me one more time why 3%, just because it's a good round number, or, I mean, I don't know. Or it will,
It's a starting point,
it's
I
just a
believe.
starting point that'll just get us somewhere without,
Flat, it's reasonable,
Reasonable.
it's not exorbitant, it's
Okay.
something that is manageable. We need to put some recommended sideboards, because yes, it's not going to be enough for
Right.
some that were already behind many departments.
that's the other thing, yeah.
But in 5 or 6 years, they'll be ahead. But it was just a reasonable number. If I said 6%, you would have all said no way. So
Okay.
3% was a reasonable.
I would be okay giving this a try. I think if it would make life easier for our staff and then do a revisit, but then let's look at this. I'm not sure what sideboards everybody else wants on it, but
We mentioned a
Fine.
few sideboards. I'm going to go to Commissioner Savas. Are
Sure.
you finished?
Yes.
Commissioner
Yeah, I
Savas,
know
you're
we're
up.
close to the hour here too as well. I would just say on the earlier conversation that allocated costs don't recover everything, and there are outside forces that drive some of those costs. So allocated cost is obviously a means of cost recovery, but it doesn't cover everything. So I recognize that. So I'm inclined to make a motion, and either staff can take what we said here today and try to wrap that into a package, or I can try to define some of that in the motion, but.
Give it a shot, Ms.
Okay, so
Commissioner
I was going to
Savas.
try to, so I move that we direct staff to revise a policy to provide a optional standard fee fine increase of no more than 3% annually, and make other language changes needed to be consistent with this revision.
And that's consistent, partially consistent with the motion that's listed in the package. Basically, I think what the motion is indicating is bring it back at a fixed percentage rate with some economic information that Commissioner Scholl asked for. And I need a second.
Seconded.
Okay, further discussion. And Commissioners, do you want to add right now any sideboards to this quickly? Do we have an understanding?
I've heard them. I feel we got them, yeah.
And when I use the word optional, my intention of that word was that the department would have the ability to say, this is not worth an increase. I don't want to do that. So I want to give them the discretion, but also have the cap.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, thank you for that, Commissioners. Tony, would you please take the poll?
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to you with revisions for your consideration on this, based on what you shared. All right, thank you. Next policy session is Budget Principles Policy Review. Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director, and Cindy Becker, Project Manager in County Administration, will present. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chair and Commissioners, in April, during our Budget Committee, we've talked about how can finance help and articulate different terms that we use when we talk about budgeting. And we have a couple of terms, or several terms, that we wanted to present to you in policy form that can help guide us and in future boards. These definitions are balanced. We talk about a balanced budget, and what that means is that the revenues meet or exceed the expenditures, and we do that successfully every year. So that, and also Oregon budget law requires us to have a balanced budget. And the next one is structurally sound, and I believe we do a really good job of that too. We look at each of our expenditures, our programs. Do they have a reoccurring fee structure to support it going forward? Or is it supported by a one-time and then we're scraping to look for funds, the next year? We look at each opportunity to make sure that there is funding going forward. And so the structurally sound would mean that ongoing programs are then identified and supported with ongoing revenues. And the third one is sustainable. This means that we're making decisions today for the budget that would not negatively impact future budgets, like we're not taking a bunch of one-time funds, starting programs, and leaving tomorrow to figure it out. And I believe we also do a good job at that. And I think it's a great call to identify these on how we structure our forecasts, our annual budgets. And so this is an opportunity and proposal to you to put this into a policy that we actively, today and tomorrow, use these as foundations.
Anything else, Cindy?
What she said.
Okay, good, that works for me. Totally works for me. Elizabeth, you make a point, just based on the prior policy session that we had. So approving fee increases would be part of a structurally sound budget, is that what you're saying?
I am.
So we haven't done that. So if we're going to adopt these principles, then we need to make the hard decisions that we always have a structurally sound budget, or we quit spending money. Quit spending money on programs that we're not sure where the income is going to come from. Now, getting back to fees, as far as I know, we have not created any new fee structure in many years in this county. It's just ongoing services, correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Yes.
As far as I know. I mean, my memory is not perfect on this. So that's just a point I want to make. Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner Schull.
Yeah, appreciate the work on this. And the paragraph that resonates with me under number 3, general policy, I like, but I think somehow the cadence or the time forecast or what is sustainable. Is it sustainable for a year? I mean, if I was to try to pick this apart, I would say, well, sustainable could be just 1 year, and structurally sound could be just 1 year, and so same thing with balance. It's only just 1 year. So the paragraph that I like that resonates with me is the finance department shall prepare a general fund forecast that provides a long-term budget assessment based on annual estimates of the revenues, so on, so on. But I think that the forecast should have some 5-year forecast or 10-year forecast to put it in a time context that it's not 1 year and it's not 30, because 30 is not practical, but at least a 5 or 10 year kind of a thing that
It says 10 years.
Pardon?
It says 10 years.
It says 10 year where?
if you finish that sentence, for the next 10 years, or a term defined by the board.
Right, but in the definitions, there's no cadence, it doesn't talk about, if you look at the individual balanced, structurally sound, sustainable, there's nothing that says 5-year, 10-year. There's no reference to that.
Do we need it? If we, to your point,
Yeah, well, because while the paragraph I just read says a lot of those things, the challenge is that nothing in the paragraph is in the definitions, and nothing in the definitions is in the paragraph, right? You're not saying balanced in the paragraph. You're not saying structurally sound in the paragraph, nor are you saying sustainable, and vice versa. So somehow marry them.
yes.
So if I may, in section 3, the general policy, you want to take that entire section together. It does, so the very first sentence is the policy to adopt a budget which is balanced, structurally sound, sustainable. And then we have one bullet that kind of defines that a little bit deeper. And then we have the paragraph that is the follow-up. It's a continuation of that first sentence, that we will have it for a minimum of 10 years. So I totally hear, Commissioner Savas, what you're saying, because we want to make sure that this is locked together. And I believe the policy in section 3 nails that all together. And then section 4, which is the definitions from section 3, which states balance. So our 10-year forecast would be balanced, structurally sound, and sustainable within the general policy. But we can certainly work to clarify and expand on that in section 3.
And so I think to your point, can you hear me? Where we would put that or add that is in sustainable, we could say sustainable means a budget that does not negatively impact X number of years of future budgets. If you want to say the next 5 years, that's where, if you wanted to put a number in, that's where it would make the most sense. I think it's implied if you take all this as a whole, but if you wanted to be clearer, you could stick in a 5 or 10-year number in that, what sustainability means.
Yeah, and I would really appreciate that, frankly, on both sustainable and structurally sound. Balance, I don't care, because that's requirement, and that's presumed a year, 'cause that's an annual thing, so it's moot there for me. But structurally sound and sustainable, I think if that could be put with some, again, cadence and language in there. And again, altogether, you're right, altogether says everything, but there's nothing that binds them together.
Regarding, Paul, before we think we're going to do that, under the definitions, where did you get the definitions? Did you make those up yourself?
It was a combination of GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, some other policies that other jurisdictions had, and my creative writing.
Okay, so amending these particular definitions would not be a problem or in violation of any GFOA or whatever we're talking about? Okay, and then my other thought on this, let's say we add 10 years to this. Gee, and something happens where a huge, unforeseen, catastrophic event, and we're all trying to plan for those in our emergency management. There's no way that we're going to be able to adhere to these budget policies. So what's our out then?
First of all, I would suggest 5 years, because when you're projecting, the further out you project, the more clumsy it gets, I think. But forecasts are continually, they're dynamic. And so we're continually looking at it, and we would continue to update it regardless.
Okay. I have a little bit problem with 10. I can go with 5. Commissioner Scholl?
Okay, so I understand the importance of these 3 words, three terms, and your definitions, which I agree with. One of the things, though, that comes to my mind is that are these 3 terms the all-inclusive guiding principles for ensuring that our budget is sustainable, balanced? One thing that comes to my mind, and maybe this is something that doesn't really fit into letting itself be added to these definitions, but the term efficiency of government. Is that something that should be a guiding principle? Or is that something that's done outside of the actual budget process, that's done between the county administrator and maybe staff members and the Board of Commissioners to ensure that what the county is doing is efficient, that there is that there's not a redundancy in efforts between the different departments? Again, I don't know if this efficiency in government is something that needs to be added or considered to your definitions that you use as guiding principles for formulating the budget that we want to see. Just something to think about. I
Go ahead.
don't know if it merits any answer here, but of course, this is something that you all know that I've expressed concern about during budget cycles before. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
And my question, if we are to adopt this policy, who interprets whether we're following a sustainable budget? You know, one budget member could say, this budget isn't sustainable because they have a particular interest in the budget going forward. And then another budget person could say, well, it is. So I want to know who interprets these definitions going forward to make sure we're on track.
So I would say these definitions, which, by the way, you're not limited by these definitions. If you wanted to add efficiency and non-redundancy, certainly the budget manual is an opportunity for that. These I would call these kind of the mechanics of a budget. These are very factual. It balances or it doesn't balance. There's whether and then in terms of structurally sound, you're either using one time for one time or not. And then the sustainable, when you do that 5-year forecast, you're either impacting it or not. So you may not like it, but I think these definitions are kind of pretty objective definitions.
So they're really not much to interpretation.
Correct.
Because 1 + 1 should always equal 2.
Correct.
Thank you for that, Mark.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So if I may expand on what Cindy shared, our 30-year forecast right now, our 30-year forecast demonstrates the sustainability. So you can see that. If you're doing 1 year at a time, you can't
No.
demonstrate that. But with forecast, that's how you true it up.
And we do have a 30-year forecast
Correct.
in the budget documents that are published every year, and people can see those online.
Correct.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so, again, I'm stepping back from this and reading it and asking myself, what is the principle? You've got the policy and you've got the definitions, so what's the principle? If they were to point to a guiding principle or a principle, read it to me. What would it be?
We're fiscally sound.
Well, see, I'm after, I think if we're, again, I understand what policy is, and the policy is pretty much, okay, I won't say it's bland, but it does speak that one paragraph. I do like that one paragraph I spoke to earlier. Now, if that is the principle, then I would say, for example, strike the word assessment, where it would read, the Finance Department shall prepare a general fund forecast that provides a long-term budget, strike the word assessment, based on annual estimates of the revenues and expenditures for the next 10 years. I love that, if you strike the word assessment. I think assessment's a wiggle word. It's open to interpretation. If it's a principle, it's more direct. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Okay, Commissioners, that is an option. Are we ready to consider either passing a policy or not? And does anybody want to make a motion?
Well, I'm just asking a basic question, Chair.
And-
Are we adopting a policy or are we adopting a budget principle that's titled principle? So if it's a principle, I'm not just asking what it is.
Well, in the document, it does say policy. So I think we're adopting both.
We're adopting a policy that contains, we can put another word in there, principles. It's basically the foundation for budget development. It's based on these 3 definitions. Other people would call them principles. I think, You can call them whatever you want, but it is a policy, and which is something you all asked us to put these definitions in policy. So we can play around with the words if you want.
Gary?
All right, we are here because 2 commissioners asked to define 3 words: balanced, structurally sound, and sustainable. That's the main purpose of this document. I'm your budget officer. You tell me what you wanted to budget each year, and that's what I propose. So I guess I'm sorry, maybe just strike section 3 altogether and just focus this on definitions. That's what you asked for, commissioners.
Well, so, here's, I don't know, I'll just say it, I'll just say what I'm thinking here. I think that if we were to forget about number 3, and 4, and combine them together, and start out with the principle would read, again, that one paragraph, and underneath there would be everything else. But I would like to have an understanding of why the word assessment is there, a budget assessment. Why it just could read budget based on.
If I may add, so budget assessment based on annual estimate. So after the first year is your budget, and then the others are forecasted budgets. So we're assessing, and they change. So the future years, 2 through 30, are all based on the assumptions that we have. And so we don't want to lock in future years 2 through the end.
Okay.
Because it's not wiggle room, it gives us the opportunity to, when something changes, we have a catastrophic event, so now we need to pivot, and then, so years 2 on give us that opportunity to do that.
That makes sense. I get that. So I'll strike my concern there. But again, that one paragraph I think should be the principle, and then have everything else up underneath it. That's just Paul.
Commissioner Scholl?
Well, I'm just going to say that when you're ready, I too can make a motion.
Okay,
on
go
this.
ahead.
I move that the board accept the policy as written and presented this morning.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Scholl has moved, we accept the budget principles and policy as presented. Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. Any further discussion?
Well, so if there's not going to be any amendments as staff's,
Do you propose an amendment to the motion?
well.
You can do that now.
Okay, I move that we, well, I would like to amend the motion to read, based on amendments suggested to the motion,
I'll second.
What was your amendment?
to include amendments discussed here today. Because staff, Gary said, which I liked, was we can bring this back to you, we can pull this together and bring this back to you. That's what I was hoping we would do today. But the way the motion was worded, is as is, essentially. And that's my distinction.
What I asked is not to kill the motion, Commissioner Savas. I asked if you want to make language changes to the current motion on the table.
And I seconded his motion.
Okay, but I don't know what that is. I don't know what
I was
you're saying.
allowed staff the discretion. I was trying to give staff the discretion to do that.
To do what?
I can answer this. So the 3 things I've heard is to strike the word assessment in section 3, to change 10 years to 5 years, and to consider moving section 3 and 4 into a single section. Those are the 3 edits I've heard.
And then I'll strike my concern about the word assessment.
Okay.
So put that off, but I would like that one paragraph as the principle.
So
that-
isn't, technically speaking, this is an addendum to the original motion. Doesn't the maker of the original motion have to agree to this?
No, you're now discussing the amendment only. You're either going to
Okay.
pass it or fail it. and
So
it goes
then
back.
we discuss the amendment, we vote on the amendment,
Right.
and then we vote on
The
the
main motion.
original motion.
Yes.
Okay. So Gary, repeat what those amendments would be, to be
All right,
clear.
so the amendment would be to change the policy, the draft to change 10 years to 5 years,
Okay?
condense current section 3 and 4 into a single section, and title it principles instead of policy.
That one paragraph, principles,
Yeah,
or principle.
yes.
I still second that.
Okay. Any other further, are you okay? All right. Tony, would you take the poll on the amendment to the motion, please?
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Schull,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you, commissioners, very much. Now, we will vote on the original.
Chair, I withdraw my motion then, because it's already been
Okay, but,
decided. Is that correct?
well,
Process?
Gary, and,
Strictly want to follow Robert's rules, you should go
Yes.
back to the main motion.
yes.
Which then is.
Because we
Okay.
need to adopt that, so I'm going to
Okay.
go back to your original motion, Commissioner Scholl, which is to adopt this entire policy/principles for a better
Well, it's
term.
now an amended motion. It's now amended.
As amended,
Yeah,
as amended,
correct.
correct? As amended. Got it? Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Schull,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much for coming forward.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You have one more policy session, that is annual review of fees for solid waste collection services. Now, despite what you talked about, this is something that's through Metro, so you do have to go and address this now. Transportation and Development staff will present. Dan Johnson, the Director of Transportation and Development, and Cheryl Bell, the Assistant Director of Transportation and Development. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to hand it over here quickly to Cheryl, who's going to do a detailed review. This is an awkward position that we're in every year regarding costs and the necessity and the ability to ensure that our hauling community is profitable and able to serve. So, a lot of stuff going on. So,
Vice Chair West is now chairing the meeting. You still have a quorum. Keep going.
okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to basically do some explanation of kind of the history about the fee assessment that was done and engagement that we have.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. So as Dan said, we're here to talk to you about the annual solid waste collection fees. As you know, Sustainability and Solid Waste Program is responsible for managing the county's solid waste collection system. And this includes the production records, an annual review of the production records of the 7 companies holding board-approved franchises. Through the franchise program, collectors offer services to the residents within unincorporated Clackamas County and the cities of Happy Valley and Barlow. And it's important to note here that collection services are not required. People can choose to opt out and do self-haul. So this review is conducted with the assistance of a contracted CPA, with the results of the review used to establish the fees charged for the variety of services the county requires our franchise collectors to offer and ensure a fair rate of return for our collectors. So during the annual review, franchisees submit detailed reports which are reviewed by staff and the contracted CPA. And this review includes an assessment of appropriate operating margins. So it's the county's practice, which is consistent with other communities in Oregon, to set fees at a level that targets a 10% operating margin, and then with the acceptable range of 8 to 12%. So for this year, looking at this year's cost drivers, the known and measurable cost increases included in our calculations are increased labor costs, increased recycling processing costs, increased truck expenses, and I'll pause right there on those. What also included, while not a known and measurable cost, was costs related to continued supply chain delays that they're experiencing for new trucks and replacement parts. When collection trucks will be put into service, hopefully later this year, early 2025, depreciation expenses will increase compared to those reported in 2023. And then the last cost driver was an 11.9% increase in the Metro disposal fee or tip fee. So I'll pause there on the tip fee because 11.9% is quite a number. The Metro tip fee or solid waste disposal fee is set annually by Metro as part of their budget process. And the tip fee is charged to solid waste franchise collectors when they unload materials at transfer stations. The cost for this disposal makes up about 25% of the cost to provide garbage and recycling services to Clackamas County residents and businesses. Now, this year, as in years past, the county advocated for a fair tip fee for our residents. In addition to staff engagement with Metro, we did strong collaboration with other partner agencies and jurisdictions, and staff supported discussions of the tip fee at the Metro Policy Advisory Committee or MPAC meetings. Ultimately, after robust advocacy, including Commissioner Scholl's very strong advocacy at MPAC, On May 2, 24, the Metro Council approved 11.9% tip fee as recommended by their rate review committee and Metro staff. The adopted 11.9% tip fee exceeds the fee predictability cap of 8% that was set after regional engagement in 2022. So when all this year's costs are considered, a fee increase is warranted to maintain an acceptable operating margin. This operating margin allows for investments in trucks and supplies, paying management and administrative costs, and allowing a reasonable rate of return for the owners of the collection companies. So the Solid Waste Commission, which is the county's formal advisory body related to solid waste matters, met on May 30, 24 to continue the annual review. The commission voted 5-0 with 1 abstaining to accept the review and recommended a fee increase proposal before to the board for your consideration. So based upon the Solid Waste Commission's recommendations, there are 3 options for board consideration today. Option 1 is maintaining fees at current level until next year's annual review. With option 1, no fee increase will be enacted. Without a fee increase, the estimated 2024 margin for the entire system will be 7.49%, which falls below the 8% floor of the acceptable range. Option 2 is approved fee increases as approved and recommended by the Solid Waste Commission effective August 1, 2024. If the board chooses option 2, a fee increase is enacted, the estimated 2024 county system margin would be 10.03%, which is in the acceptable range and almost right on that 10% target. This fee increase results in approximately 5% increase across the wider range of services throughout the service zones. And lastly, option 3 is propose an alternate to the amount or timing of the proposed increase. The Solid Waste Commission respectfully recommends option 2, that approve a fee increase as approved and recommended by the Solid Waste Commission effective August 1, 24. So with that, knowing time is of the essence, it's my presentation. I'm happy to support your deliberation or answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Commissioner Shaw, you're up.
Yes, thank you for that information. Okay, I'm looking at your chart here, but for the record, could you state, for the average family that's putting out their trash can and recycling, should we approve option 2? What is the average increase in the bi-monthly bill? Is it $1.45? Or is it $1.45 per month?
It's about it's a $1.95 to $2 per month increase for a customer with a weekly collection of a 35-gallon cart,
Yeah.
which is your typical bigger roll cart that you see.
You said per month.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
And your
correct.
question was,
Yeah, to identify, so if I have a 32-gallon container, it's going to cost me $1.95
Yeah.
per month, or about a 5.3% increase in my bill.
Correct.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
so what would happen if the board does not approve this fee increase?
If the board does not approve a fee increase, the operating margin for the total system operating margin for the county, so that's all our fee zones, would be about 7.49%, which is below that target range that we try to hit between that 8 and 12%. It would hold for this year, and then we would revisit it a year from now when we do the annual fee increase for next year.
And so if we did not pass that, what would be the annual fee increase for next year?
We won't know that because we don't have the known and measurable costs for the analysis, because each year we do a look back based on reports provided to us by our franchise collectors.
Dan?
And the assumption would be they would be greater.
Yes.
Of course it'll
We
be
try-
greater.
There's cost increases that come on an annual
So
basis.
you're asking for a 7.5 this year?
No, that's what it is.
Well, we're asking to keep within the margin. With a lot of our districts, I mean, fundamentally, we try to do smaller incremental changes than large changes at one particular time. And so keeping within that margin, if we kept the rates they are this year, theoretically, we would come back next year, and we basically say the rates have to increase exponentially more to meet the inflationary costs and impacts they're facing, so.
And how much was the increase last year? You understand my point. We have seen huge rate increases on garbage collection, and I don't know what the driver is because the rate increases are higher than inflation and even the CPI. So what are the drivers behind these huge rate increases that our haulers must pass along to the customers or they'll no longer be in business?
There are things we don't control. So you've got supply chain issues they're having with their equipment. You have other governments dictating fee increases that we are not in support of, but are mandated upon our haulers for their tip fees in certain areas. You've got general inflationary costs across the board and personnel costs as well.
And the other government is who?
That would be Metro.
That would be Metro.
Yes.
And so what's Metro doing with all this money? They don't even collect the garbage. The question's not rhetorical. Can I get an answer?
We have asked them repeatedly. But let's harken back to like 3 or 4 years ago. They came to us and there was a discussion on the tip fee at the time. And the dialogue, and I can't remember, it was a substantial one, I think, but I think the discussion was around the fact that these one-off annual huge increases, that's where we referenced that fee predictability discussion. It's like we need more predictability for our elected officials and our public on what these fees should look like. And I can't remember, it was like an 8%.
It was a set schedule over a period of time to maintain under that 8% cap, and that was the 2022 advocacy work that was done jurisdictionally.
And the discussion at that point in time was around, remember they talked about this about capital improvements, they wanted to do new transfer stations, all that. And it's like, okay, you know what? If you want to have a discussion around a capital improvement plan and you can develop that plan and then that plan relates back to their rate, that's a discussion, a strategic dialogue about a rate increase. A couple things haven't happened to the best of my knowledge. There hasn't been a dialogue around a capital plan, and I'm not aware of any clear information we received, number one. And then number two, there has been no real clarity about the rate increases for the tip costs. It's simply, hence the discussion we were having with Commissioner Scholl at MPAC. It's like, clarify to us why in the heck do we need this increase versus like an 8% or 6% or 7%, whatever it might be. And we haven't really received, I don't recall us ever receiving an answer to that question that you articulated in that effort.
We did not receive an answer.
Thank you for trying to answer my question. I do appreciate that. A couple commissioners are in the queue. Commissioner West.
Thank you. When we look at the cost around recycling processing specifically, a couple questions around this. My first question is what's happening in the plastics market, and how is that impacting the cost within that's being passed on to the consumer, to the ratepayer?
I think we're going to bring up our expert because Rick Winterhalter, who's the manager of the Sustainability and Solid Waste team, he's engaged more in those conversations about markets.
Come on down. Please introduce yourself.
Madam Chair, Rick Winterhalter with Sustainability and Solid Waste. Commissioner West, your question is a good one. I guess recycling processing costs, actually, I took a look at this the other day, and if we were to take all of our recycling and toss it into the garbage, it would be about a $9.60 increase to the curbside. So right now, that processing cost on a customer, as I looked across, is about $2.50, just a little bit under that. So the plastics market, it's a commodity market, so that's a tough question to answer.
So let me just add on to that. Why I ask it is I know just recently in the near future, we can all remember when the plastics market fell out and it was very expensive to process plastics and not real actual economic benefit. And in some ways it was hard to even quantify an environmental benefit specifically with plastics. And I don't know if you can speak to that and that's adding any additional increases or costs.
As far as processing costs for plastics or?
Yeah. Right, so the plastics market impacting the cost.
It did have when we had the situation with China deciding to enforce the rules that they had, and there a whole lot of things that led up to that. But simply, yes, there was a challenge there because markets had to readjust. People were pricing things correctly. That wasn't happening for a while, and so things got so a little more expensive, and we addressed that issue. But overall, the environmental benefits of using recycled materials over virgin materials is always a plus. And so,
But when we look at what actually ends up in the landfill, what actually can be processed and actually recycled, that ends up in those bins, the way we handle plastics traditionally is there's no real net benefit to the environment within our recycling. And so I'm concerned about those costs and the instability of the markets that we've recently seen. Another thing that I'm concerned about is we often tend to have local jurisdictions add on nice to haves but not necessaries. Expensive things like recycling styrofoam, how we process fluorescent lighting, things like that that are just very expensive to handle. And when you look at the economic whether it's an economic and environmental bent, where is that kind of balance for us? Sometimes it feels like it gets a little bit more like nice to haves, but it's not really economically necessary, appropriate for what we're actually gaining to hopefully have environmentally. I don't know if you can speak to some of those things we may be providing that just are expensive, but not necessarily like must-haves.
So the nice-to-haves, I guess, to use your term, are typically what we have at drop-offs, and folks can drop those off, as they're making other trips, and the environmental benefits, depending on trips and that sort of thing, are always exceed what it is to throw them away. And so we're not talking about those materials. We do, and the board has approved kind of I'll just call it a convenience collection. So for customers that wish to have somebody come by the house and pick those up, they pay a premium for that. And those fees are not what we're talking about today. So that's a different situation.
Okay. I mean, this is where I think I'm at is also 7.4 is pretty close to the low end of the target with no increase. We don't know exactly what the next year will bring. Working closely as a city councilor in Wilsonville over the public services and seeing this additional expenses and services layered on or try to be required or requested by local government has seen people's rates go up. And I think that in many ways, our local jurisdiction acts very differently than many other municipalities or authorities across the country, which increase our costs because there's an ideological driver behind a lot of this. I'm going to be supporting option one because I don't trust Metro's fee increase in the process of doing it. It's not my, and so, and I also think that we structurally maybe have some issues around our processing, recycling, and things that will require that increased cost to the consumer. I'll be supporting option one if a motion is made, or I'll make that motion.
You're going to make a motion?
I could.
Well, we have another commissioner in the queue. Commissioner Scholl, go ahead.
Okay. Now, on our contracts with solid waste franchisees, the language to try to support the 8 to 12% margin range is in those contracts, correct?
It is a policy that we have adopted. So
Okay.
it is not in code, and so all of the franchises are really, language for those are in code.
Okay.
And that is not
Yeah,
in code.
I see. Okay, it's in our code.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question here is, if we were to allow, by decision today, to continue the margin range to continue until a year from now at 7.49%, Councilor Beto, would that be any source of concern to you?
I would defer to the department. I mean, it's a revenue question, really. Unless I'm misunderstanding your question. The board has a series of options, and which one you pick, I think, is revenue focused rather than legal focused.
Okay, and I have one more question, and that is the drop from the margin range where it was, which when it was in the proper range, dropping down to 7.49 is driven exclusively by the unexpectedly high tip fee that Metro introduced here just a few months ago at 11.9% increase.
The Metro tip fee is about 25% of the cost to provide garbage and recycling services, so it definitely has an impact. And the other drivers are those costs, the labor costs, cost
Yeah.
for process recycling, cost for trucks and truck. So remember that these are also contracts that are labor contracts done with the franchise haulers themselves, with their own labor. It's not
Yeah,
county.
right, yeah.
And this is about setting a revenue for the franchise collectors. So.
And then for our next opportunity for the board to hear this issue is, you said a year from now?
That's correct, Commissioner Schull. We do an annual fee review
Yeah.
because the cost drivers change each year depending on what's
Yeah.
happening. So then
Okay.
we do a look back to see if we can get within that margin for our franchise collectors because it is part of their rate of return.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I'm just going to mention, colleagues, that in my experience here, having done this for a number of years, if we don't incrementally increase the fee now, we'll be looking at larger increases next time. So you're going to have to decide, I'm in favor of number 2. So if we do get a second on number 1, I'll be a no vote on that because I think that we can't control what Metro does with their outrageous tip fees, unless we eliminate Metro, which would be a heavy lift, but we've thought about it for a long time. But I do want to make sure that our franchises, who are businesses and employ people and are serving people, get what they need to continue operation. So I'm looking at this more from their perspective as, fuel costs more, although I think they're moving to alternative kinds of vehicles as well. The fuel, the labor, the structure, the fact that, increased costs when they have to keep running in the middle of emergencies, fires, heat domes, all those ice storms are a big deal. So I think this increase is appropriate. And I feel comfortable with it because it's from the businesses themselves, and they are in there to at least get some margin of profit for their business and for the people they employ. And as I said, we can't control what Metro does, but I think that we need to listen to our Solid Waste Commission in this sense. But this is my opinion.
Commissioner West?
I wish our Solid Waste Commission would consider things about like how dumb it is that we recycle plastics. What happens is all that plastic gets processed here, then it gets up on big ships. They ship it across our oceans into third world countries, and then many of that plastic ends up in our oceans. That's what happens with plastics, and it's in a volatile market that we recently just saw crash and cause an increased expense to our consumers. I think our landfills and incinerators can handle the plastics, glass, paper, things that are efficiently recycled and reused, fine, that's good stewardship. But we also have a lot of nice to haves and ways for people to like try to handle other substances, but we do it at the expense of the ratepayer with I think, not really looking honestly at the overall environmental impact. Until the commission comes and thinks of creative ideas to help the ratepayer and not the plastics market, I'm not super interested in supporting option 2.
Okay.
Further discussion? Do I hear a motion?
I move to support option 2, approve fee increases as approved and recommended by the Solid Waste Commission effective August 1, 2024.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Schull has moved for option number 2, approve the fee increase as approved and recommended by the Solid Waste Commission effective August 1st, 2024. Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. So, Commissioners, I need to tell you something. As the chair of this commission, I've taken a lot of votes when I have been diabolically opposed to the policy just to make nice. Again, we have 4 members here. Last year we had 4 members, and I was the deciding yes vote. I'm getting tired of that. I'm not going to do that this year. So Gary, we're at a deadlock, and we haven't even taken the vote, but I know where the votes are. Now, how do you want to handle that? I'm tired of taking the final vote because I am the chair and I vote last on fee increases.
So I would recommend taking the vote to finish the motion. If it looks like it will fail, it's either dead, or you can choose, we could bring it back next week to issues perhaps, or tomorrow's business meeting when all 5 of you are present and have another vote.
I will call for the vote, Tony.
Commissioner West,
No.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Schull,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
I abstain, motion fails 2-1-1. Now, Gary, we can bring it back if all 5 commissioners were here. I assume, based on previous history of the votes, that this would pass. Jane, do you have any opinion on, we could bring this back at tomorrow's business meeting? We could bring it back at issues next week if there is a desire to pass the fee increase.
I think for notice requirements, it may be advisable to bring it back next week.
Jane, I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
I said for notice requirements, it may be advisable to bring it back next week.
I'll put it on issues for next Tuesday. I'll include the staff report, and you can take another vote there. How's that?
That'd be fine. I normally don't do that, but there is value in this. I understand, we have all the haulers represented in the back of this room, and you all want it. You all want these fee increases because the cost of business is going up. I understand that. But the process of having the local county commissioners rubber stamp Metro, and you all know where I'm at on this, to rubber stamp Metro's inefficiency and inability and unwillingness to reel in fee increase, I no longer accept. So at some point in my life, I have to take a stand. And that's where I'm at today when I abstained from my vote. Thank you very much. Gary, what's next?
That is the last session for today, Chair.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.